The sweltering heat bore down on the city, causing the asphalt to shimmer and the air to feel thick and oppressive. Javier reclined in the plush leather seat of his luxurious car, the hum of the air conditioning a stark contrast to the bustling, chaotic energy of the streets outside. His gaze wandered over the busy cityscape, his thoughts drifting to the grand opening of his new real estate branch. Javier's mind was a whirl of satisfaction and pride. The journey from humble beginnings to the pinnacle of the city's business elite had been arduous, but he had persevered. Now, his name was synonymous with success, his reputation built on the twin pillars of hard work and unyielding determination. His musings were interrupted by a faint tap on the window. He glanced to his side, mildly annoyed at the intrusion. An elderly woman stood there, her frail frame hunched with age and burden. Her clothes were worn, and her face, deeply lined with wrinkles, spoke of a life steeped in hardship. Javier hesitated, then rolled down the window a fraction. The woman stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. She held out a trembling hand, her eyes pleading. "Sir, could you spare a little money for some bread?" Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried the weight of her desperation. As Javier reached into his pocket, he noticed something unusual. The woman wore a pair of distinctive earrings. The sight of them tugged at a distant memory, something familiar and yet out of reach. He handed her a crisp $100 bill. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much," she murmured, her voice breaking with gratitude. Tears welled up in her eyes as she clutched the money tightly. Javier watched her for a moment longer, his eyes drawn to the earrings once more. There was something about them that gnawed at him, but he couldn't quite place it. Dismissing the thought, he rolled up the window and turned his attention back to the upcoming event. As the car pulled away, the elderly woman's figure grew smaller in the rearview mirror, and with it, the fleeting pang of recognition faded. Javier shook his head slightly, chiding himself for getting distracted. Today was about celebrating his achievements, not getting lost in nostalgic reveries. The car glided through the city streets, eventually arriving at the grand venue of the new branch's inauguration. The building stood tall and proud, adorned with balloons and banners in vibrant colors that reflected Javier's company logo. Reporters and guests mingled outside, cameras flashing and voices buzzing with excitement. Javier stepped out of the car, the oppressive heat immediately hitting him. He adjusted his suit and put on his sunglasses, more to shield himself from the probing eyes of the media than the sun's glare. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the day ahead. As he walked towards the entrance, his thoughts briefly drifted back to the elderly woman. There was a strange unease that lingered, a sense of unfinished business. But he brushed it aside, focusing instead on the present moment. The day's events were meticulously planned, and he prided himself on his ability to stay on course. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Employees bustled around, finalizing last-minute details. The decor was elegant, with a large neon sign bearing the company's name hanging prominently above the entrance. Javier took a moment to appreciate the sight, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. His staff greeted him warmly, their respect and admiration evident in their eager expressions. Javier listened to their updates, nodding approvingly. Everything was in place, just as he had envisioned. As he moved through the room, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. This was his moment, a celebration of his hard work and perseverance. Amid the bustling activity, the grand opening of Javier's new real estate branch was drawing a considerable crowd. The air buzzed with excitement and anticipation as guests mingled, waiting for the event to commence. On the outskirts of the crowd, Donna stood hesitantly, her frail figure a stark contrast to the vibrant scene before her. She had not intended to be here at this event on this day. It was mere chance or perhaps fate that had led her to this very spot. Her eyes, clouded with age and hardship, scanned the gathering, searching for a kind face, someone who might spare a moment to help. As she edged closer, trying to remain inconspicuous, 2 security guards approached her, their expressions hard and suspicious. "Ma'am, you can't be here," one of them said, his tone brusque. "This is a private event." "I'm not here to cause trouble," Donna pleaded, her voice trembling. "I just need some help. Please, I won't disturb anyone." The guards, unmoved by her words, began to push her back, their actions rough and unyielding. "You need to leave now," the second guard insisted. "We don't want any problems." The commotion caught Javier's attention. He had been speaking with a group of investors when he noticed the disturbance at the edge of the crowd. His curiosity piqued. He excused himself and walked over to see what was happening. "Is there a problem here?" Javier asked, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension. The guards straightened, recognizing him immediately. "This woman was loitering around, sir," one of the guards explained. "We were just escorting her out." Javier's eyes fell on Donna, and recognition dawned. "It's you," he said softly, surprised to see her again so soon. "What's your name?" "Donna," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Javier's heart skipped a beat. The name, combined with those distinctive earrings, seemed like too much of a coincidence. He needed to know more. Turning to his assistant, who had been shadowing him throughout the event, he said, "Please, take Donna to the waiting room. Make sure she's comfortable. I'll be there shortly." The assistant nodded, gently guiding the elderly woman away from the crowd. Javier watched them go, his mind racing. He felt an inexplicable connection to this woman, a pull that he couldn't ignore. Back at the event, Javier struggled to refocus. His thoughts kept drifting to the past, to memories of his childhood and the kindness that had been shown to him and his mother. Could it truly be the same Donna? He hurried through the remaining formalities of the event. As soon as he could, he made his way to the waiting room where Donna sat, looking out of place amidst the modern furnishings. "Thank you for waiting," Javier said, entering the room. "I'm sorry about the misunderstanding outside." "There's no need to apologize, young man," Donna replied, her voice gentle. "I'm just grateful you were willing to help." Javier sat down across from her, his eyes searching her face for any signs of recognition. "Donna?" he began slowly. "Have we met before? You seem very familiar to me." The elderly woman smiled faintly, a faraway look in her eyes. "Aren't we?" Javier leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Did you ever live in a small house on the edge of town many years ago? Did you help a young mother and her son?" Donna's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, I did," she whispered. "That boy, he was named Javier. Such a sweet child." A wave of emotion washed over Javier. "That was me," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You saved us. I never forgot your kindness." "What? Are you sure about that?" she said. Javier squeezed her hand gently. "We have much to talk about. But first, let's get you something to eat and drink. You're my guest now." As his assistant brought refreshments, Javier couldn't help but feel that this encounter was more than mere coincidence. It was a chance to repay a debt of gratitude, and perhaps to rediscover a piece of his own past that he had long thought lost. Javier sat across from Donna, the noise of the event outside a distant hum. The assistant had left after ensuring Donna was comfortable, and now, in the quiet of the waiting room, the past began to press heavily on Javier's mind. "Donna," Javier began, his voice steady but low, "I want to tell you about my past, about the days before you helped us. I think it's important you understand why I owe you so much." Donna nodded, her eyes full of gentle curiosity. "Please, Javier, I would like to hear your story." Javier took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair as memories he had long buried started to surface. "My father. He was a complicated man. At first he was kind, loving even, but he changed. He lost his job and turned to alcohol. It wasn't long before the drink took everything from him, from us." He paused, looking down at his hands, as if seeking strength from the act of speaking aloud. "When he drank, he became someone else, someone angry and violent. I remember nights when he would come home in a rage, yelling at my mother for no reason. I would hide under the bed, trying to block out the sound of his shouting, the crashes of furniture being thrown." Donna's eyes clouded with empathy. She reached out, placing a comforting hand on his arm, but said nothing, letting him continue. "One night," Javier continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "it got worse than usual. My mother had managed to save a little money, hoping to leave him. He found out. He was furious, out of control. He threw us out, right onto the street." The pain in Javier's voice was palpable. He wasn't just recounting facts. He was reliving the moments. "We had nowhere to go. We spent that night on a park bench, my mother crying silently next to me. I remember feeling so helpless, so afraid." A tear slipped down Donna's cheek, but she remained silent, her presence a solid anchor for Javier's storm of emotions. "It was the next day when we met you," Javier said, finally looking up to meet her eyes. "You were the first person to show us kindness after that night. You took us in, gave us food, a place to rest. It was the first time in months I saw my mother smile." Donna squeezed his arm gently. "I remember you both. You were so small, so scared. But there was a strength in your mother, a determination to protect you." Javier nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "She was my rock. After we left my father, she worked so hard to make sure we survived. She took any job she could find, no matter how difficult or demeaning. It was her strength that kept us going." He took another deep breath, steadying himself. "I've built a lot since then, Donna. But every step I took, every success I achieved, I carried the memory of those days with me. They shaped me, made me who I am. And your kindness was a turning point. It gave us hope when we had none." Donna's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I'm so proud of what you've become, Javier, and so happy that my small act of kindness could make such a difference." "It wasn't small," Javier said firmly. "To us, it was everything. And now, I want to repay that kindness. I want to help you, just as you helped us." Donna smiled, a soft, grateful smile. "You already have, Javier. Seeing you here, hearing your story. It means more than you know." Javier leaned forward, his expression earnest. "It's not enough. I want to do more. You deserve so much more. Please, let me help you." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Donna nodded. "All right, Javier. I will accept your help. Thank you." Javier felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a sense of purpose. This was only the beginning, but it was a beginning grounded in the strength of their shared past. He stood, offering his hand to Donna. "Let's go. We have a lot to catch up on." As they left the room together, the past and present intertwined, Javier knew that this encounter was not just a chance meeting. It was a new chapter, a new journey, inspired by kindness and bound by the strength of their shared experiences. The small, quiet room in Javier's office seemed a world away from the bustling city outside. Javier sat across from Donna, his heart heavy with the weight of her story. The past few hours had been a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. Now, as they sat in silence, he could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the lines of worry and years of hardship. "Donna," Javier began softly, "I know you've been through a lot. Please tell me about your life these past few years. I want to understand everything." Donna took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked down, gathering her thoughts, and then began to speak, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "After we lost everything, things were incredibly hard," she said, her eyes distant. "We moved into a tiny, run-down house on the outskirts of the city. It was all I could afford after selling our apartment to pay for Celia's surgery." She paused, the memory of those difficult days evident in her expression. The house was in terrible condition. The roof leaked, the windows were broken, and the walls were covered in mold. But it was a roof over our heads, and that was all that mattered at the time. Javier listened intently, his heart aching for the struggles she had endured. "How did you manage?" he asked, his voice low. "I did what I could," Donna replied. "I took up any work I could find. Cleaning houses, washing dishes in restaurants, even sewing clothes for a little extra money. But it was never enough. Celia's medical needs were constant and expensive." She looked up at Javier, her eyes filled with a quiet resilience. Celia. She was such a bright, beautiful girl. After the attack, she changed. The pain, the betrayal, it broke her spirit. She used to be so full of life, always laughing and dreaming of a better future. But after what happened, she became withdrawn, scared. Donna's voice wavered as she continued. "The surgery was supposed to help her walk again, but it failed. She's been bedridden ever since. Watching her suffer, unable to move, broke my heart. I did everything I could to care for her, but it was never enough." Javier's jaw tightened as he listened. The injustice of it all was staggering. "Did you ever try to get justice?" he asked. "We did," Donna said, her voice filled with bitterness. "But Alejandro, the man who did this, he had friends in high places. The police dismissed our claims, saying there was no evidence. They painted Celia as the aggressor, saying she had seduced him. It was all lies, but no one would listen to us." She shook her head, her eyes glistening with tears. "We went to court, but without money for a good lawyer, we had no chance. The case was dismissed, and Alejandro walked free. It was like a slap in the face. I felt so helpless, so powerless." Javier felt a surge of anger and sadness. "What about now?" he asked gently. "How have you been managing?" "Barely," Donna admitted, her voice breaking. "I go out every day, begging for help. Some days, people are kind, and we get enough to buy food and medicine. Other days, we go without. Celia's condition requires constant care. She's in pain every day, but she tries to be brave for my sake." She looked at Javier, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "When I saw you today, I didn't know what to expect. I just hoped that someone might listen, might help us. And now you're here." Javier leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Donna, you're not alone anymore. I promise you, we'll get justice for Celia. We'll make sure she gets the care she needs. And you deserve so much more than this." Tears streamed down Donna's face as she whispered, "Thank you, Javier. You have no idea what this means to us." Javier reached out, taking her hand in his. "We'll fight this together. I'll make sure Alejandro pays for what he did, and I'll do everything in my power to help Celia." Javier sat in his dimly lit office, a heavy silence enveloping the room. The grand opening had gone off without a hitch, but his mind was elsewhere. He watched as his team of investigators pored over stacks of old records and photographs, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of desk lamps. "Anything yet?" Javier asked, his voice low but insistent. One of the investigators, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, looked up. "We're getting there, Mr. Javier. It's a complicated case, but we're finding pieces that fit." Javier nodded, his gaze shifting to the array of documents spread across the table. Photographs of a young girl, Celia, lay among medical records and police reports. The story they told was one of pain and injustice. Javier's resolve hardened. He spent his nights in the office poring over the case files, consulting with lawyers and planning their next moves. Each piece of evidence, each witness statement, was meticulously examined and re-examined. The more he uncovered, the clearer the picture became of the corruption and negligence that had allowed Alejandro to escape justice. His legal team worked tirelessly, filing motions and gathering testimonies. Javier himself met with key witnesses, his persuasive charm and genuine desire for justice convincing many to come forward. Late one night, as the city slept, Javier found himself alone in his office, a cup of cold coffee in his hand. He stared at the wall covered in notes and photographs, a timeline of events meticulously pinned and connected by red string. His mind was a whirl of strategies and counter-arguments. He knew this was a battle not just for Celia and Donna, but for all those who had suffered in silence. The thought of their faces gave him strength. He would see this through to the end. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The air was thick with tension, a silent promise of the drama to unfold. Javier sat at the plaintiff's table, his fingers drumming a steady rhythm on the polished wood. Beside him, Donna clutched her hands in her lap, her eyes fixed on the front of the room where the judge would soon preside. Reporters filled the gallery, their cameras and notepads ready to capture every moment. The case had garnered significant attention, a story of injustice that had finally come to light. Javier's legal team whispered among themselves, reviewing notes and preparing for the day's proceedings. The weight of the moment was not lost on anyone. Alejandro entered the courtroom, his face a mask of arrogance. He wore his uniform as if it were armor, his eyes scanning the room with disdain. His lawyer followed closely, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. They exuded confidence, but Javier knew it was a facade. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The trial began with opening statements, each side presenting their version of the events. Javier watched as the defense tried to paint Celia as unstable, a young woman who had fabricated the entire story. The lies stung, but he knew the truth was on their side. Witnesses were called, one by one. The fear in their eyes was palpable, yet they spoke with courage. An elderly neighbor recounted the night she heard Celia's screams, her voice trembling as she described the terror in the girl's cries. A former colleague of Alejandro's testified about his reputation for intimidation, adding weight to the accusations. Javier's heart pounded as he listened. Each testimony was a step closer to justice, but the pressure was immense. The defense cross-examined ruthlessly, attempting to discredit each witness, but their stories held firm. The pivotal moment came when a key witness, previously too scared to come forward, entered the room. Maria, a young woman with a past intertwined with Alejandro's, had been reluctant to testify. She walked to the stand, her head held high despite the fear in her eyes. "Please state your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Maria Gonzalez," she replied, her voice steady but soft. "Do you know the defendant?" Maria nodded. "Yes, I do. He threatened me when I tried to report him." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Alejandro's confident smirk wavered. "Can you tell us what happened the night Celia was assaulted?" the prosecutor asked. Maria took a deep breath. "I saw him follow her. I saw the fear in her eyes, and I heard him brag about it afterward, how he got away with it. He threatened me, told me I'd end up like Celia if I said anything." The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Maria. Her words hung in the air, a damning indictment of Alejandro's actions. Javier felt a surge of hope. This was the testimony they needed. The defense lawyer rose, a sneer on his face. "Miss Gonzalez, you have a history with the defendant, don't you? Isn't it true you're holding a grudge?" Maria met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm telling the truth. He's a predator, and he needs to be stopped." The judge called for order as the courtroom erupted in whispers. Alejandro's mask of arrogance cracked, revealing a glimpse of panic. He shifted uncomfortably, his confidence visibly eroding. As the trial continued, more witnesses corroborated Maria's story. The evidence mounted, and Alejandro's lawyer struggled to maintain their defense. The final blow came when the prosecutor presented a recording, a damning piece of evidence that left no room for doubt. It was a conversation between Alejandro and a fellow officer, detailing his actions and his belief that he was untouchable. The judge's gavel struck the bench, calling for silence. "The evidence is clear," he said, his voice firm. "The defendant, Alejandro Martinez, is found guilty on all charges." Alejandro's face drained of color. His lawyer slumped in defeat. The courtroom erupted in a mix of applause and tears. Justice had been served. As the guards led Alejandro away, Javier felt a profound sense of relief. The battle had been long and grueling, but they had prevailed. Donna wept softly beside him, her hand gripping his. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for everything." The air in the small apartment was heavy with tension. Celia lay on the worn couch, her face pale and contorted with pain. Her breathing was shallow, each gasp a struggle. Donna hovered over her, panic etched in every line of her face. "Celia, hold on," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, just hold on." Javier burst through the door, his heart pounding. He had been on his way home when he received the frantic call from Donna. One look at Celia, and he knew they didn't have much time. "We need to get her to the better hospital now," he said, his voice steady but urgent. Donna nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm scared, Javier," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "We'll get her the help she needs," he assured her, already lifting Celia into his arms. She was light, too light, and the feel of her frail body against his chest fueled his determination. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and sirens. Javier held Celia's hand, whispering words of comfort, even as fear gnawed at his insides. Donna sat beside him, her hands clasped in silent prayer. At the hospital, the chaos was immediate. Nurses and doctors took Celia from his arms, wheeling her away on a gurney. Javier followed, his heart in his throat, as they disappeared behind the swinging doors of the emergency room. Donna sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "What if she doesn't make it?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "She will," Javier said firmly, though his own voice wavered. "She's strong. She'll make it." Hours passed in agonizing silence. Javier paced the small waiting room, his mind racing with memories and fears. He thought of the young girl who had been so full of life, reduced to this fragile state. He thought of the promise he had made to Donna and Celia, the promise to make things right. A doctor finally emerged, his expression serious but calm. "Mr. Javier?" he called. Javier rushed forward, his heart pounding. "How is she?" The doctor sighed. The surgery was complicated, but we were able to stabilize her. She's in recovery now, but it will be a slow process. She'll need a lot of care and support." Relief flooded through Javier, and he nodded. "Thank you, doctor. Can we see her?" "In a little while," the doctor replied. "We'll let you know when she's settled." Javier returned to the waiting room, sinking into a chair beside Donna. "She made it through the surgery," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's going to be okay." Donna looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Thank God," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "Thank you, Javier. I don't know what we would have done without you." "We're not done yet," he said softly. "We have a long road ahead, but we'll get through this together." The next few days were a blur of hospital visits and sleepless nights. Javier stayed by Celia's side, watching as she slowly regained her strength. One evening, as the sun set outside the hospital window, Celia opened her eyes and looked at Javier. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice weak but sincere. He smiled, his heart swelling with relief and pride. "You're doing great, Celia. Just keep fighting." "I will," she promised, her eyes shining with determination. Javier looked at Donna, who stood on the other side of the bed, her face softened with hope. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice firm. "One step at a time." Celia's recovery was slow, but steady. Each day brought new challenges, but also new triumphs. She relearned how to sit up, to stand, to take those first tentative steps. Through it all, Javier and Donna were there, offering support and encouragement. Months passed, and the light in Celia's eyes grew brighter with each passing day. She was no longer the fragile girl who had been carried into the hospital, but a strong, determined young woman. Javier knew that the road ahead would still have its obstacles, but as he watched Celia take her first unassisted steps, he felt a profound sense of hope. They had come so far, and together they would continue to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The car pulled up to a modest yet inviting house, its exterior painted a soft blue with white trim. The yard was neatly kept, a small garden bursting with vibrant flowers. Javier turned off the engine and looked over at Donna and Celia, who sat in the back seat. Donna's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. "Is this it?" Donna asked, her voice trembling. Javier nodded. "Yes, this is your new home." He stepped out of the car and helped Celia into her wheelchair. She was still weak, but had made significant progress since her surgery. With Donna at her side, they moved slowly up the walkway. The door opened easily, revealing a cozy interior bathed in warm light. Inside, the house was everything their old apartment had not been. The living room was furnished with comfortable chairs and a sofa, a bookshelf filled with books and knickknacks, and a fireplace that added a touch of warmth and homeliness. The kitchen, visible through an archway, was modern and fully equipped. "Look, Celia," Donna whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "This is all for us." Celia smiled weakly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Javier wheeled Celia through the house, showing her each room. The bedrooms were small but cozy, with soft beds and bright windows. Celia's room had a desk by the window, perfect for her to sit and look out at the garden. "This is amazing," Celia said, her voice stronger than before. "Thank you, Javier." "You deserve this," Javier replied, his voice steady. "Both of you." Over the next few weeks, the house began to feel like a home. Donna settled in, her disbelief giving way to a quiet contentment. She spent her days tending to the garden, her hands bringing life to the flowers and plants. The small victories of daily life, things they had once taken for granted, now brought immense joy. Celia's recovery continued at a slow but steady pace. Each day she pushed herself a little further, determined to regain her strength. Javier was always there, offering support and encouragement. He brought in physical therapists and specialists, ensuring she had the best care possible. "Let's try standing today," Javier said one morning, his tone gentle but firm. Celia nodded, her face set with determination. With Javier's help, she gripped the arms of the chair and slowly pulled herself up. Her legs trembled, and for a moment it seemed she might fall. But Javier's hands were steady, his presence a reassuring anchor. "You're doing great," he said quietly. "Just a little more." With a final push, Celia stood upright, her weight supported by her own two legs. She swayed slightly, but the triumph in her eyes was unmistakable. Donna, watching from the doorway, clapped her hands together in delight. "You did it, Celia!" she exclaimed, tears of joy streaming down her face. Celia sat back down, breathless but smiling. "I did it," she repeated, more to herself than anyone else. As the days turned into weeks, these small victories accumulated. Celia began to take steps with the aid of crutches, her confidence growing with each attempt. Javier never missed a session, his unwavering support a constant source of strength for both Celia and Donna. One afternoon, Javier found Celia sitting by the window in her room, a book open on her lap. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with a smile. "I walked 10 steps today," she announced proudly. "That's amazing," Javier replied, a smile spreading across his face. "You're getting stronger every day." Celia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, "without your help and your belief in me." "You did this, Celia," Javier said firmly. "Your determination, your strength, I'm just here to support you." Celia's eyes shimmered with emotion. "We're a team," she said softly. "All of us." The day had started like any other. Donna had gone to the market, leaving Javier and Celia at home. The cozy atmosphere of their new house was filled with the sounds of daily life. Javier sat in the living room, a book open in his lap, the pages turning slowly as he lost himself in the story. A faint, acrid smell began to prick at his senses. At first, he dismissed it as a fleeting thought, but the odor grew stronger, more insistent. He closed the book, his brow furrowing as he stood up. Something wasn't right. Javier followed the smell, his steps quickening as he moved through the house. He reached the kitchen and stopped short. The unmistakable scent of gas filled the air, a hiss emanating from the stove. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized the danger they were in. "Celia!" he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. There was no response. Javier's fear escalated. He sprinted down the hallway, the smell of gas growing stronger with each step. He reached Celia's room and flung open the door. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. Celia lay on the floor, unconscious, her face pale. The gas had already taken its toll. "Celia!" Javier cried, dropping to his knees beside her. He shook her gently, then more urgently, but she didn't stir. A deafening explosion rocked the house, throwing Javier against the wall. Flames erupted from the kitchen, the fire spreading rapidly through the old, dry wood of the house. Smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe, to see. Javier's mind raced. He had to get Celia out. He lifted her limp body into his arms, his muscles straining with the effort. The heat was intense, the flames relentless as they consumed everything in their path. "Stay with me, Celia," he whispered, his voice raw with desperation. He navigated through the smoke-filled corridors, each step a struggle against the rising inferno. The fire roared around them, the heat blistering his skin. He coughed, his lungs burning from the toxic fumes, but he pushed on. Javier reached the front door, kicking it open with a force born of sheer determination. The fresh air hit them like a wave, cool and life-giving. He stumbled out into the yard, collapsing onto the grass with Celia still cradled in his arms. "Celia, please wake up," he pleaded, his voice cracking. He checked her pulse, relief flooding through him when he found it, faint but steady. Donna arrived at that moment, her bags dropping to the ground as she ran toward them. "What happened?" she cried, her eyes wide with fear. "Gas leak," Javier managed to say between coughs. "She's breathing, but we need to get her to the hospital." The sound of sirens filled the air as neighbors, alerted by the explosion, called emergency services. An ambulance arrived and paramedics took over, swiftly assessing Celia's condition and administering oxygen. Javier watched, his body trembling from the adrenaline and the sheer physical effort of the rescue. "Is she going to be okay?" Donna asked, her voice choked with worry. "They're taking her to the hospital," Javier said, his eyes never leaving Celia. "She'll be okay. She has to be." The paramedics loaded Celia into the ambulance, and Javier climbed in beside her, holding her hand tightly. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. Javier's mind was filled with a single thought: Celia's safety. At the hospital, doctors and nurses whisked Celia away for treatment. Javier and Donna were left in the waiting room, the tension between them palpable. "She'll make it," Javier said, more to himself than to Donna. "She's strong." Hours later, a doctor approached them. "She's stable," he said. "She inhaled a lot of smoke, but she's going to be fine." Javier let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. When they were finally allowed to see her, Celia was awake, her eyes tired but alive. She smiled weakly as they entered the room. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Javier took her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "We're a family, remember?" he said, his voice steady. "We take care of each other." The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Javier sat beside Donna, his eyes fixed on the judge as he read the verdict. The room was silent, every ear straining to catch the judge's words. Alejandro stood with his head bowed, his once arrogant demeanor replaced by a look of resignation. "For the charges of assault and abuse of power, the court finds the defendant guilty," the judge declared, his voice steady and authoritative. "Alejandro Martinez is hereby sentenced to 20 years in prison." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Donna grasped Javier's hand tightly, her eyes filling with tears. "It's over," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "We finally have justice." Javier nodded, feeling a profound sense of closure. The battle had been long and arduous, but they had prevailed. Alejandro was led away in handcuffs, his fate sealed. The weight of the past began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope for the future. As they left the courthouse, the sun shone brightly, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere inside. Javier felt a lightness in his step, the burden of the past finally easing. He glanced at Celia, who stood beside him, her face serene but thoughtful. In the days that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Celia's recovery continued, each day bringing new milestones. Javier found himself drawn to her more and more, their bond deepening with each shared moment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat together on the porch of their new home. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, the soft hum of insects, a gentle backdrop to their conversation. "Do you ever think about the future?" Celia asked, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "All the time," Javier replied, his voice thoughtful. "I think about what we've been through and what lies ahead. I think about you." Celia smiled, a soft, genuine smile that warmed his heart. "I think about you too," she said. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "You would have found a way," Javier said firmly. "You're stronger than you know." They laughed together, shared their dreams and fears, and found comfort in each other's presence. The affection between them grew naturally, a slow and steady development that felt right. As the weeks turned into months, Celia's progress was remarkable. She began to take her first steps towards independence, each one a victory. Donna watched with pride, her eyes often brimming with tears of joy. One morning, as Javier stood by the window, he saw Celia in the garden, tending to the flowers with a careful hand. He felt a surge of admiration and love. She was a testament to resilience, a beacon of hope. "Javier," Celia called, her voice carrying on the gentle breeze. "Come here for a moment." He joined her, kneeling beside her in the soft earth. "What's up?" She looked at him, her eyes shining. "I just wanted to thank you for everything. You've given us a new life." Javier took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We've done this together," he said. "Your strength, your determination. It's been incredible." Celia leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my rock." They sat in the garden, surrounded by the beauty of new beginnings. The flowers bloomed brightly, a symbol of their journey and the promise of the future. Javier felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. As the sun set and cast a golden glow over the garden, Javier and Celia stood together, hand in hand. Donna watched from the porch, her heart filled with gratitude and hope. They had come through the fire, stronger and more united than ever. Javier looked at Celia, his heart full. "Here's to new beginnings," he said softly. "To new beginnings," Celia echoed, her smile radiant.